In this lesson, we shall find x. And so we shall focus on this Euclidean geometry question in front of us. But first things first, we note that we need to determine the size of the angle x. But we actually can see the measure of this arc is given, and it is exactly 78 degrees. And the measure of this arc is also given, and the measure is 32 degrees. We note that we need to find x, but first things first, we recognize that any circle actually in geometry has a center. Any circle has a center. Let us call this center of the circle A, precisely this way. Moreover, we note by definition that the measure of an arc is the measure of its central angle. And so in this particular case, we note that the measure of this arc is the measure of this central angle. So that we also note, therefore, that the measure of this arc is 32 degrees, which is the measure of this central angle. And therefore, we also note that the measure of this particular arc here, the measure of 32 degrees is the measure as well of the central angle here as well. So that now in the end, if this is 32 degrees as the measure of the arc, we note also that the measure of this central angle is 32 degrees as well. The measure of this arc is 78 degrees, so that the measure of this central angle is 78 degrees as well. Okay. Moreover, we can perform further constructions. We can join basically these 2 points on the circumference of the circle. And now, upon careful inspection, we note that the following observations will necessarily be very, very true and correct. For example, if we note that in this particular case, the size of this particular angle here at the center is 78 degrees. It is exactly 78 degrees. And now the measure of this particular arc is also 78 degrees. We remember that the angle at the center of a circle is twice the angle at the circumference of the circle. So this arc subtends an angle of 78 degrees at the center. This same arc in this case will therefore obviously be in a position to subtend. Right, it will be in a position to subtend this particular angle here. Now the angle at the center is 2 times that. So if you divide 78 by 2, you get 39 degrees. 39 degrees. Right, you get exactly 39 degrees. So that this angle at the center is 2 times the angle at the circumference of the circle. Next, we note that now here we have an angle of 32 degrees. We have an angle of 32 degrees. And the angle at the center, subtended by this arc, is equal to actually 2 times the angle at the circumference of the same circle subtended by the same arc. And therefore, we divide 32 by 2 and we get 32 divided by 2 is 16 degrees. Exactly 16 degrees. So that this angle here of 32 degrees equals 2 times 16. Okay, so 2 times 16 is 32. Okay. Now, in this case, we're good. We actually are so good. And so what then do we observe out of this? Therefore, this angle here, so we note that the angle x is actually the exterior angle of this particular triangle here. It is the exterior angle of this particular triangle over there. If you look at this particular triangle here, right, so the angle x is sort of the exterior angle of this particular triangle, and it makes us realize that x is therefore equal to 39 degrees, 16 degrees. And the reason for this is that exterior angle of triangle equals the sum of interior opposite angles. So that now in this case, with 39 and 16, we add those up. We add those up step by step, carefully so. And if we add those, then we have 16, or rather you can just do it in order, in the order in which they're written here, 39 plus 16. 39 degrees plus 16 degrees is 55 degrees. It's exactly 55 degrees. So this is actually exactly 55 degrees. It is exactly 55 degrees. It is exactly 55 degrees. So it is exactly the value of the angle x as it was required. It is exactly the value of the angle x as it was required. Additionally, I want us to take note of a couple of things. So we note that the measure of an arc, the measure of an arc is defined as the measure of its central angle. The measure of an arc is defined as the measure of its central angle. So in this particular case, for instance, the measure of this arc, which is 78 degrees, is defined as the measure of its central angle, which is 78 degrees as well. The measure of this arc, which is 32 degrees, is defined as the measure of this particular central angle as well. With that observation, we can actually be rest assured that we say here the measure of the angle x is actually exactly 55 degrees. So the measure of the angle x is 55 degrees. Now, with this understanding, we take note of a couple of things. Now, just in case we can decide to label this, because the center is A, and if we call this one B, C, D, E, and then we then say, for example, we discuss first things first, the measure of the arc. Okay, let's choose an arc, right? If we decide to discuss the measure of the arc, so the measure of the arc, which is, for instance, BC, we can write inside the circle. The measure of the arc BC, for example, is equal to the measure of the central angle, which is BAC. The measure of the arc BC is equal to the measure of the central angle, in this case, 32 degrees. Of course, this is by definition. More so, we also observe, in this case, the following, right? We also observe the following, right? Let's take note of the fact that the measure of the arc ED, you can write here, the measure of the arc ED is also equal to the measure of the central angle, which is EAD, which is 78 degrees. So the measure of the arc ED is equal to the measure of the central angle EAD, which is 78 degrees. Okay, so now this sounds very interesting, and it is just a small little problem on what we term Euclidean geometry. It's a small little problem on Euclidean geometry. We've been able to solve these step by step. And so we have most certainly made the most of what is question over here. And we thank you for joining us. It was awesome having this discussion. Until next time, we found that obviously the measure of the angle x is 55 degrees. And we've solved this problem step by step. And thanks again for joining us. It was awesome having this discussion. Until next time, take care and goodbye.